As Colonel Gaddafi brandishes the amorphous Al-Qaeda as the engine of the insurrection against his rule, the U.S. administration expresses concern over what it claims is the group's strong presence in eastern Libya. Is Al-Qaeda a factor in the Arab revolts of 2011, or is its spectre simply a tool used to forestall the march of history? Is Al-Qaeda a player or a spectator? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to Inside Story. I'm Rida Fakhri. As the ripple effects of revolutionary change continue to be felt throughout much of the Arab world, Al-Qaeda has been conspicuously silent. The group, which has for years now denounced autocratic Arab leaders as puppets of the West, appears to have watched from a distance as events continue to unfold from Tunisia to Egypt following the ouster of Presidents Zine al-Abidine Ben Ali and Hosni Mubarak. Osama bin Laden hasn't uttered a single word so far, at least, about the changes sweeping the region. And when Ayman al-Zawahiri, Al-Qaeda's number 2, spoke recently, he reiterated the group's known stance. Meanwhile, Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi says those protesting against him are led by Al-Qaeda. He claims an Islamic State has been established in the eastern provinces of his country.
All the people of Derna cleanse them. A man with a beard announced that women should not be allowed out to the streets. Did you see? And he claimed himself the Khalifa, following Bin Laden and al-Zawahiri, who will rule you at the end. They are a small number. Wherever you hear about their movement, they are a small number of terrorists trying to turn Libya into states ruled by al-Zawahiri or Bin Laden. So America can come saying it won't allow a new Afghanistan in North Africa.
Well, for more on this, I'm joined now by our 3 guests. From Washington, D.C., Robert Grenier, the former director of the counter-terrorism unit at the CIA. From London, Kamal Helbawi, founder of the Muslim Association of Britain. And also from London, Phil Rees, terrorism expert and author of Dining with Terrorists, Meetings with the World's Most Wanted Militants. Welcome to you all. Robert Grenier, you worked for a very long time on counterterrorism at the CIA and on ways for the U.S. to curb the influence of Al-Qaeda. Where have the revolutions in making that we've seen in the Arab world so far left the influence of the organization? Is it in a weakened position or quite emboldened by the fact that some of its longtime enemies, like Hosni Mubarak, have now been ousted?
Well, you know, you would think that it should be emboldened and that this should be a welcome development for the organization. But in fact, I think in a strategic perspective, this is a very bad thing for the organization. And the fact that, as you've just mentioned, we're hearing very little from Al-Qaeda right now, I think underscores that fact, that essentially events are sweeping past them. And what we're seeing now in the region, I think, is underscoring the irrelevance of the organization to the future of the Middle East.
Phil Rees, how relevant has Al-Qaeda become to the future of the Middle East if some of these governments that will now take shape following certainly the uprisings in Egypt, Tunisia, possibly Libya, and who knows where else in the future, if these regimes, governments, represent the national interests of their own people, might we see a less America-friendly foreign policy?
Well, of course, this will take the ground from underneath Al-Qaeda. I mean, if you look for one reason for the cause of what the West now calls terrorism, it is the lack of space for political Islam in the Middle East. And if political Islam is to be given that space, then I think Al-Qaeda will be fundamentally weakened. So I think it's very clear to me that this is what the United States will have to consider in its future policies. Now, if you look at the statements from Al-Qaeda now, they're saying actually the revolutions are incomplete. They're phony. They will be hijacked. And in fact, the United States will impose a Mubarak version 2 in Egypt. But while that doesn't happen, while a genuine democracy emerges and political Islam is allowed space, Al-Qaeda will be weakened.
Do you agree with that, Kamal Helbawi? Will Al-Qaeda be weakened? After all, in these uprisings that we saw certainly in Egypt, there was scarce mention of any religious fundamentalism or any anti-American sentiment, even though polls throughout the last few years have suggested that there is a relative amount of anti-Americanism in the region, but not in this instance. There seemed to be a push for more democracy, more freedom, more opportunity.
Political Islam movements have been struggling long time ago, and they paid a very high price, imprisoned and detained and prevented and called banned al-Mahdura in Egypt, for example. And America was pressurizing political Islam, listening to the foolish advice of stupid rulers like Mubarak, like Gaddafi, like others in Saudi Arabia. And this, even during the last week, when David Cameron, the Prime Minister, was in Cairo, he said, I will not visit the Muslim Brotherhood or have any dialogue with them, and did the same mistake done by Condoleezza Rice in 2005 when she visited the American University, Cairo, until they discovered that the only democratic group or movement in the Middle East are the Islamic movements or political Islam movement. Of course, there is a relatively reality and truth in what Robert is saying from America, that if you give a chance to political Islam movements and they flourish naturally, they will gain ground, and the Muslim people and young men will find that there is a future, and they are participating in reshaping the future, so they will not be attracted to violent or to terrorist or extremist ideologies. And during the last revolution in Egypt, you have seen that the Salafis are asking people not to join the demonstrations, and you have never heard anything from the ex-violent groups, whether Jamaat Islami or jihadi groups in Egypt. You never heard anything after the revision books they produced, and they have some relation with security apparatus in Egypt.
Right.
Let
me take this point then to Robert Grenier. There seems to be a tendency, Robert Grenier, in Washington particularly, to lump all of these Muslim Islamist groups in one basket without making any distinction between them, despite the fact that the Muslim Brotherhood has espoused democratic ideals, has engaged in the democratic process in Egypt for many years. How much acceptance now is there in Washington that the previous policy to shun these groups has been a failure? How much of a dilemma is Washington in today, and will it decide to rethink fundamentally its approach to these groups?
Well, I certainly hope so. I think that there are many here in Washington and strongly represented in the United States among currents of opinion that one hears here to do precisely what you're describing, that is to lump all of the different Islamically oriented groups in one basket. And when you debate with them, as I frequently have, they can always find quotes from some leader, which appears to be very strongly anti-Israeli or strongly anti-American, and obviously that there will be room for those currents of thought. There is, I guess I would describe what we see in Washington right now as tentative support for the participation of Islamist groups in the democratic awakening that we're seeing in the Middle East right now. I think, however, people will be watching very closely, and there will certainly be those who will seize the opportunity when and if it presents itself to say, aha, you see, these are groups that are very negative. They are essentially anti-democratic, and they should be resisted.
Robert Grenier, the specter of Islamist radicalism is being brandished very often, obviously in the context of Libya, but also in Tunisia, in Egypt as well. The leadership there saying that, we should stay put because the alternative would be absolute chaos. Hillary Clinton just a couple of days ago was saying that her biggest fear was that Libya would turn into a giant Somalia. She expressed concern about the number of Al-Qaeda recruits going from Libya to places like Iraq and Afghanistan. How much of a real threat is this, or is this simply a bogeyman that's always alluded to for fear of what might be the unknown?
Well, the specter, as it is described by Muammar Gaddafi, of course, is nonsense. The idea that somehow Al-Qaeda is leading the revolution in Libya, that's complete nonsense. The situation that Secretary Clinton is describing and that she is apparently concerned about is that in a situation of complete political chaos, if that were to arise in Libya, then you would have a situation where there was essentially ungoverned space. And in that ungoverned space, there are any number of different elements, groups who could find a safe haven and who would be able to operate with relative impunity in the way that relatively small but very violent groups are able to do in Somalia. So I think that's the scenario that Secretary Clinton is concerned about, but certainly we are a long way from that point.
Phil Rees, how real is this scenario?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I spoke to someone from the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group recently that had been banned in the United States as a foreign terrorist organization. And I think that Islamists and secularists now, at least in the short term, believe that their interests are shared and their long-term security is enhanced by collaborating together to ensure that democracy is founded and founded properly. I think for the United States, it's got to consider in the long run that you either have real democracy or you don't. And when you have this rebirth of an Arab identity, and let's look at Egypt. Every Egyptian, you can be Coptic, you don't have to be part of the Ikhwan there. Every Egyptian would want to change government policy to Israel. So what happens when that would happen? What that would occur? What will happen in Bahrain if democracy comes there and you have a Shiite majority, which you would have there, that might be leaning towards Iran and destabilizing nearby Saudi Arabia.
But
so
is there
how much
any
democracy is America prepared to have?
Well, precisely, is there an indication that America is prepared to accept the central tenet of democracy, which is precisely allowing widespread representation of groups, political forces that represent a large segment of the population, whether one likes it or not?
Well, I think that's that's why the Muslim Brotherhood are walking on eggshells, both in Egypt and in Tunisia. They've made certain agreements regarding women's rights, religious freedoms, etc. So, they're actually trying to work within a system that the Americans must accept. But I think there will be issues, and you're already seeing in Britain headlines like oil prices will double because of the unrest in the Middle East. I mean, the reason the West is there is because of the West's interests, and that will collide with Arab interests at some point in the future. Now, this is not to do with terrorism, but of course, if you then prevent Arab expression, this very exciting rebirth that is happening, which is not anti-Western, it will become anti-Western again if the West's hand is seen to be meddling. And there are already indications of that. Look at the British having sent an SAS team and MI6 agents into Libya in this botched attempt. I mean, feeble as that was, it's a kind of indication that the West can't keep its fingers out of Middle Eastern politics.
Robert Grenier, is that a fair depiction of what's going on? That the US will always butt into the affairs of other countries, even though it says that it may not be doing so? Phil Rees referred to the British forces landing in Libya and getting involved apparently in gunfire exchanges. But we also have now senior lawmakers in the US talking about the need to arm some of the opposition rebel fighters. And of course, much talk in many different parts of the world about the need to impose a no-fly zone. Would that be counterproductive in such a nationalist country as Libya?
Well, I think that the United States and the West more generally really do need to walk a very fine line here. I think there's a great deal of positive sentiment toward those who are in open revolt against Gaddafi. And there was a sentiment on the part of some to try to be of assistance, and even those among the current rebels who are making open requests for assistance, depending on the form of that assistance, that they might change their tune very, very quickly. So, for instance, there are those who are saying that, as you mentioned, there ought to be the imposition of a no-fly zone so that Gaddafi can't use his air force against the rebels. However, were the West to do that, led by the United States, that would be very problematic because the first stage in any such operation would be to suppress all anti-aircraft defenses. And that there could very well be collateral damage and casualties as a result. So I think that the West has to be very, very careful. I think that they have to operate with a very light hand. There may be certain types of humanitarian assistance that they could provide to rebel-held areas. But again, they have to be very, very careful both in terms of what they do and the way that they're perceived.
And some, of course, continue to argue that in the long term, Al-Qaeda could benefit from these ongoing revolts or uprisings, revolutions in the making in the Arab world, as some regimes continue to cling on to power. Some, as Abu Khalid, a Jordanian fighter, seem quite certain that in the long term, Al-Qaeda is going to emerge as a winner. He says, at the end of the day, how much change will there really be in Egypt and other countries? There will be many disappointed demonstrators, and that's when they will realize what the only alternative is. We're certain that this will all play into our hands. Kamal Helbawi, your thoughts on this? In the end, if there's a lot of disappointment, dashed hopes, will Al-Qaeda then prevail?
I don't think that in a country like Egypt, Al-Qaeda or violent groups will prevail, because the long history of the Muslim Brotherhood explaining Islam in a moderate way, in a wasati way, as comprehensive, international, and moderate as well, so, and divine. So, and they have a very deep root in the society now, in mosques and in cultural societies. So the culture of the Egyptian society have almost become moderate Islamic understanding, not violent and terrorist or extremist ideas like we used to have in the 80s and the 90s by the Jamaat Islami and by the Jihadi Islam. But in a country like Libya, where Gaddafi has stopped every aspect and every culture and every move and every movement, and he made Abu Salim massacre, where even Muslim Brotherhood who were moderate were, you see, included in the massacre as well. And I know some of the Libyan fighters who went to Afghanistan. There was a large number of them. Some of them returned back, and the Saif al-Gaddafi, Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, had made a protocol or an agreement with them. I am sure these members of a violent group or whatever you call them will find the chance in the revolution against Gaddafi, and they will find good armaments in different stores that have been stolen, and they will continue because they have to revenge. So the tribal society in Libya is to a great extent different from the civil society in Egypt. If you go to Tunis as well, we will find that the return of Sheikh Rashid al-Ghannouchi of Nahda party and the movement, and his friends who returned with him from London and Paris and Germany, they will work in the society with full freedom at present, spreading the idea. Because the problem is that if you close everything, if you have a cat in your room, a cat, not a human being, and you close everything for her, she can't go out, she can't eat, she can't drink, don't expect that she will be nice to you. So it is, if the more freedom we have, the more Islamist, political Islam will gain ground, and the people will follow that moderate Islamic wasati version, and will not follow Al-Qaeda, and will not follow at all the violent or extremist groups.
Robert Grenier.
The more tribal,
go ahead.
The more tribal places you have, you can find some extremism because of lack of proper understanding of Islam. Yemen, Saudi Arabia, Libya, and such areas.
Robert Grenier, then how concerned will the United States be about this ideology, because we tend to talk a lot about Al-Qaeda, though it has appeared to have become, in the last few years, largely a franchise. Many people using the name Al-Qaeda, Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb, and so on and so forth. It appears to have become more of a concept, less of an organization. So just how much of a cause for concern will there be in Washington that the ideology could continue to spread?
Well, yes, there are those who will remain firmly attached to the cause. I don't think there's any question about that. And yes, absolutely, the organization, such as it is much more of a franchise. It really doesn't have a very strong internal structure. It's a number of disparate groups who have branded themselves in similar ways because they share a similar ideology. But what I think we need to worry about now is the environment in which they will find themselves. And I think that we need to be very concerned lest a situation arise like the one which is apparently hoped for by this jihadi whom you quoted just a few moments ago. He apparently is hoping for the failure of this democratic awakening. He is hoping that the aspirations of the people will be frustrated. And in that sort of an environment, then those who provide a violent alternative will find people who are inclined to join them because their legitimate aspirations have been frustrated elsewhere. So if anything, this argues for a very strong Western interest in the success of the democratic awakening that we're seeing in all these countries.
Phil Rees, what kind of model, though, do you think the U.S. has in mind when it says that it is ready now to embrace a bigger form of democracy and obviously to bring to the fold some of these religious groups? Does it have the Turkish model in mind? And give us a sense of the opposing dynamics that pull all of these different groups apart. Some people are under the impression perhaps that Al-Qaeda is close to the Muslim Brotherhood, but that's as far as it can, be from reality.
Well, of course it is. And if you look at Rashid Ghannouchi, the head of the Ennahda party in Tunis, was raised earlier by Kamal. Look, he wrote some tracts sort of in the 1990s, are very influential for the Justice and Development Party in Turkey, that basically accepted what is in effect a Western model for democracy. And of course, their party is effectively Islamist rooted. And a lot of Arabs are looking at them as a means, as a model whereby secular and religious elements of society can live side by side. So I think that there are these new models. And I think people like the Muslim Brotherhood have now embraced democracy in a Western style. But many of their policies will not be liked by the West. I mean, without any doubt, they will bring in the tenets of Islamism. But equally well, if they're elected in, why not? I don't think that's a problem. And I think that the question about Al-Qaeda here, absolutely, if democracy is not allowed to flourish, Al-Qaeda will benefit. If you look back at the history, they were always splintering from the Muslim Brotherhood because the Muslim Brotherhood did not have power and they were conceived to be sort of useless. So they said, we have to pick up the gun to fight. That is, in a way, the narrative of the post-Hassan al-Banna period, the last 50 years. So unless that changes now, and if it changes, then Al-Qaeda will be weakened. If it does not, and if foreign interference is still seen to be there for the majority of people, it will strengthen the movement.
Robert Grenier, how confident are you that the right change will come about primarily from Washington? I know you worked with the CIA for more than 25 years. You left. Many people suggested in media reports that you left because you felt that the approach toward Al-Qaeda was not the right one. You were against the so-called extraordinary rendition of some detainees and their subjection to forms of torture. Do you feel that the U.S. failed in its so-called war on terrorism?
Well, I think that dating back to my own time in the CIA and working against terrorism, I think that the CIA, in cooperation with other services in many other countries, did very well tactically. I think they were very good at capturing terrorists. But where I think they failed very badly was in engaging in what has frequently been referred to in the United States as the war of ideas. I felt very strongly at the time, and in fact said so at the time, that a very strong pro-democracy policy should have been a central part of the U.S. appeal to try to strategically weaken these extremist movements throughout the Muslim world.
An ongoing discussion, no doubt, but I want to thank all my guests for now for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. Kamal Helbawi, Phil Rees and Robert Grenier, thank you all very much indeed for joining us. And thank you for watching. We welcome, of course, as always, your comments and suggestions. You can email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. From me and the team, thanks for watching.